Hi everyone, welcome to class 3 of Addressing Educational Equity. Today we are going to be talking about the intersections of race and poverty in the US in particular and how those impact educational access, outcomes, and opportunities. I just want to start with a couple of graphics. So the link to these on the side from Children Out on Unequal Footing, Inequalities at the Starting Gate, is a report. There's a link to it from the side if you want to look at more either raw data or some of the other visuals in it. But I wanted to first just look at this image that looks at reading and math scores. The top one is math by race and ethnicity. The bottom is reading skills by socioeconomic status. And so just looking at how these are split up, at the top, the math scores, we've got Asian students followed closely by white students, and then further behind we have Latinx students who are English speakers and Black students, and at the back we have Latinx students who are English learners. So the second one, looking at reading abilities, this list goes just straight down by socioeconomic status. High socioeconomic status at the top, low socioeconomic status way at the back. And so I am showing these to indicate not that there's some sort of inherent difference. I just want to be really clear on that in the cognitive capacities of students based on income or race. I want to show this to show how much before students even get into kindergarten, we are failing low-income students and we are failing students of color. And because of the different ways that our racial and economic systems are connected in the US, that Black people and Latinx people are more likely to be underpaid and to be generationally under-resourced around wealth. There's a lot of connections in terms of who is set up for success before they even start kindergarten. This next, I think, is just so important to look at as educators. So this is looking at how parents and teachers rated the persistence of various students based on broken down by race and ethnicity. So if you look at the bottom picture, which is the parent rating picture, you see that the Black student is rated as very persistent by a parent. So is the white student, so is the Asian student, so is the Latinx English speaker. The Latinx English learner is a little further back in the ratings, but when we go up to the teachers' ratings by race and ethnicity, we see that the Asian student is up near the front, the white student is further back, then followed by the Latinx English learner, the Latinx English speaker, and finally the Black student in the back. And so this is on the first day of kindergarten. This is what we come in thinking about the students that are able to join us in our classes. And so these students from the beginning, I don't think that any educators are going to say, well, you know, I just think Black students aren't going to try hard. There's always going to be reasons, but the ways, you know, like we were talking last session about implicit biases and the ways that our brains operate to build and tell these stories, to make these connections, that's happening unless we are trying to actively work to make that not happen. So this hurts Black students and it hurts the Asian students that are up at the front, right? If a student is like perceived as trying their very hardest all the time and they don't get something, then the immediate assumption is like, well, they're just not smart enough to get it, right? Because they're already trying so hard. And so it can impact the ability to get the support needed for students in the front as much as it can impact the ability to get the support needed for the students in the back. And then we've got in the middle the white students, sort of seen as having an average level of persistence, right? So I wanted to show this because I think it's really helpful to see both that as educators, we never get to see the whole of a child, right? We get to see a lot of them, and we're so lucky to, but we're always going to have our own stories sort of on top of things. And to be fair, their parents have their own stories on top of things too. In the readings that you did for that week, last week, and for this week, there's going to be some readings about how our biases especially disserve Black students, how our sense of who is going to be a troublemaker, of who is going to do well, of who deserves our support, of who is trying their best, of who is doing things wrong on purpose. Like all of that plays in so much to a subconscious bias, especially from a majority, supermajority white teaching force who has grown up in a culture that's taught us false information. It has, I say a lot that growing up in a culture as a white person, a culture that is teaching me subtly but over and over that white people have and deserve power because of something in us, like that it's broken my brain. And so that my job is to step back and think and let myself be wrong and know that I'm never going to have all the information, and know that my job is to constantly be trying to think about racism and think about white supremacy and think about how those things are shaping my initial instincts and then push back against them, right? So this is a look at high school completion rates and college attendance rates for boys based on household income rate, which is on the x-axis, and broken down by race. White students are in blue, Black students are in red. So the y-axis in the first graph is how many people have a high school degree. So as the income level goes lower, it's both fewer students are graduating high school, and the gap between white and Black students at the first quartile is an 8.3% difference. So 8% more white students are graduating high school. So it looks like about 62% to about 70%. Whereas once it gets into the top quartile of income, then we've got about a 4.2% difference. So I think about 85% to about 90%. So you can see that neither race or class is in itself predictive, right? It's the ways that they interact that give us the fuller picture. If we're not talking about race, we're not getting the full picture. And if we're not talking about class, we're not getting the full picture. And similarly, with the college attendance rates, we have these gaps. Interestingly, the college attendance rate gap is lower at the lower income quartile and larger at the higher income quartile. So it's set up similarly, but you'll see the scales are really different, right? So the scale on the first one, 60 to 70% of students approximately are graduating high school either way. And I misspoke in the first one, but about percents at the beginning, but you've got that. So in the second one, when we are looking at the lowest quartile, we've got about 33 to 39% of students attending college. And this isn't even graduating, right? So this is all from race and economic opportunity in the United States, an intergenerational perspective. Again, I have the link there if you want to both see more graphs and read more of the raw data and the commentary on it. But I like these graphs because I think that they show us that by trying to oversimplify things, by trying to look only at race without class or only at class without race, we miss protective factors and risk factors, and we miss figuring out how to most effectively put supports in place. So here's some college completion. This is from Inside Higher Ed. There's a bunch more graphs on that page. So this looks at who's enrolled in any college. Where I'm looking at the left graphic, enrolled in four-year and completed a college degree. And this looks at socioeconomic status and math scores. So the top, the green row is above median math scores, but high SES. The yellow is high SES quartile with below median. Red is low SES quartile with above median. And blue is low SES with below median. So what you will see is in the high socioeconomic status quartile, so again, that's 75th percent, people with below median math scores are 11% more likely to enroll in college, and also still more likely to enroll in both a four-year college and to complete a four-year degree. I think that to me is the part that feels the most resonant, that you can do well as a low socioeconomic status student and your outcome opportunities are still lower. You are still less likely to attend college than a below average math student with more money. The right side looks at 10th graders, they're both sets of 10th graders, I believe, who completed a college degree within 10 years and breaks it down by race. So yellow is white, blue is black. This sounds funny, right? Red is Latinx and green is Asian. And the top graph looks at above median math scores, and the lower graph looks at below median math scores. And so with students with the same sort of level of math scores, white students are drastically, still 11% more likely than black students and 16% more likely than Latinx students to complete a college degree within 10 years. This does not have, though I believe the full report does have, the stats on who enrolls in college, which I think are a little more disparate even. So I want to watch two different videos, and I wish that I had a video that did a little better looking at the complications of how race and class intersect, but instead I'm going to show you two separate videos. This first one, the statistics lottery, looks at socioeconomic status and opportunity by zip code, because we know that for educational opportunity and for healthcare outcomes and for economic outcomes, there's a drastic difference from zip code to zip code. I'm sure we've all seen that before. And so I want to show this video that looks a little at sort of how that happens. And then after this video, we're going to look at another one that instead looks at how race impacts two students. So both have their own sort of agendas in the end. This one's by a United Way, and you can tell at the end. So take that with a grain of salt, but I wanted to share it anyway. So here's our first video. Feel free to click through. This is also in the course sites if you'd rather not watch it in this presentation.
Meet Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. And Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
All right. So I think that that gives us a piece of the picture, and I think that one piece of the picture that's not in there is the ways that race complicates even a lot of those factors. We know, for example, that black boys that are not reading at grade level by third grade are more likely to be imprisoned ultimately, which we'll definitely talk more about school discipline and the school to prison pipeline in a few classes, but I encourage you to look into also. So I want to move forward to this next. So before we move on, I wanted to talk just a little more about the sort of wealth gap that they were talking about in this video that we just watched. So I encourage everyone to definitely feel free to do some more research on the racial wealth gap, but the just for a couple of numbers, the median net worth for a white family, which takes out the picture of total wealth, so it takes out the very, very, very rich white people and very, very rich black people when we get to that number. I believe it's through the 75% median, is the racial wealth gap looks like. The net worth for a typical white family is 171,000, so that like takes all of the assets, including cars and homes and cash and retirement accounts, and subtracts all of the debts. And so 171,000 for a typical median white family and 17,150 for a typical black family. So almost exactly 1/10 that amount, which, as the video was saying, like impacts sort of how property taxes work. It impacts all sorts of different elements. And in Boston, so they did a study in 2017 of 5 different cities, and in Boston they found that the household median net worth for white people was higher. It was 247,500, and for black people it was $8. $8, not 8,000, not 80,000. $8 for U.S. For African Americans, for U.S. blacks, for black people who are from the Caribbean, it was 12,000. For Dominicans, it was $0. So it's a broad range, but in all of those cases, the racial wealth gap is pretty high. And for Puerto Ricans, it was 3,000 as compared to 247,000. So it's just about 1/80th of the wealth of median white families. So that's all big picture. So I want you to think about whether you were confronted at any point by any examples, either direct or indirect, which made you aware of the challenges that cultural bias around race or class introduce into education. So implicit bias, explicit bias, or the sort of racist policies, either segregationist or assimilationist, like Kendi was speaking of. So what examples? How did those come out? And did you attribute those challenges to poverty, to race, to both? How did those sort of cultural biases around people of color, cultural biases around lower income people and lower income students, how did those play out? So write a reflection about that and send it to me so that I can get a sense of your thinking. I just want to end with one more quick video from Erica Purnell, who works at an independent school. This is from the National Association of Independent Schools. And just to give you a little sense of some of the work that I think is some exciting stuff that's happening.
First of all, common language and understanding what we mean when we say diversity, how is that different from, and once we get a sense of how those things are, making areas of institutions
So there's a lot I really appreciate about what Erica said there. I really valued where she said that there's so much pain and it's mostly not seen. And I think there we're thinking about the pain of the people of color and the low income people who are already in the system, who are not getting their needs met, and also the pain that comes from change. Change is loss, and change is its own painful experience, and it's different for different people within the system. No people are necessarily going to experience that loss and that sort of wresting away of what has been normal and what has been expected and what has worked to whatever degree. And I really valued that. And then I also appreciated saying, you know, there's a lot of momentum and then there's not. It dies down, and what can we do when there is that momentum to not just try to shift things in the short term, but try to build in those accountability systems, build in those sort of long-term holds to make sure that this doesn't just fade away when something newer and shinier or a new initiative or we had some bad test scores come back, so we have to shift things. Like, how do we really from jump build in this idea of keeping everything in there for the long term? So thank you so much, and I hope to read your reflections as before. If you want me to respond, just let me know. Otherwise, I most likely will not. I just like to see sort of where people's thinking is at. Otherwise, see you in the discussion boards. Okay.